Hello, you're watching Vietnam in Focus. With a mass security sell-off in the listed market recently, foreign funds are believed to seek a total exit from Vietnam's market due to the recent financial turbulence. There's also a possibility that foreign investors have shifted their attentions to the unlisted market and engage in private equity deals that are considered less risky.
Exactly. In this field, our guest this week is an expert. His name is Keirn O'Connor. He's the managing director of AIM Capital Management, and he's here on our talk show today and will share his views on the possible exit activities of foreign investors and also his view on the outlook of the private equity market. We'll join in a discussion with him and our host, Thomas Maresca.
Keirn O'Connor is Managing Director of AIM Capital Limited, where he oversees day-to-day operations and is responsible for fund strategy, managing the investment team, sourcing deals, evaluating opportunities, executing investments, and providing post-investment support to portfolio companies. Before coming to Vietnam, Keirn was with the New York-based venture capital firm High Peaks Venture Partners. Keirn also spent 5 years at Macquarie Capital Partners, a boutique investment banking firm specializing in private equity transactions within the property sector. Keirn was first based in Chicago and was later sent to the London office. In London, Keirn executed deals throughout Europe and specialized in sophisticated cross-border private equity funds, where capital was raised from investors worldwide and investments were made in multiple countries. Keirn holds a BA in economics from Williams College in Massachusetts. Keirn O'Connor, thanks for joining us. Help us make some sense out of what's going on in the Vietnamese stock market. In October, there was a big sell-off from foreign investors, and there's been foreign investors leaving the market since pretty much August, it seems like. What's going on? What's your take on this?
I think that there's, overall, foreign investors are nervous about Vietnam now. I don't think it's actually a new thing. I think, as many people know, there was quite a big stock market bubble here in 2006 and 2007. It popped in 2008, and then there was the big stimulus. There was a lot of growth that came back on the short term, but in the meantime, there was so much credit growth that the real estate prices got so big that there was another bubble, which I actually think is popping just about now. And I think that what we're seeing in the stock market is just foreign investors getting a little bit nervous about, what is the state bank doing, what is the monetary policy, what's going to happen with the currency here, etc. So I think it's going in and out. I think it's been, fairly consistent, actually. The market's been staying in kind of the 400 to 500 range for the last 2 years almost. That's a big difference compared to a few years ago when it hit its high of about 1,100.
So do you think that foreign investors are wanting to leave the market, or are they just kind of hedging their bets at this point?
I don't think that people are really leaving the market. I think that people are being very careful. So again, years ago, there was a race to get in here. That's definitely not true anymore. I think that what we're seeing now, first of all, there's kind of two markets, I think, to think about. One is the listed market and one is the private market. And I think the situation in both of them is actually very much the same. There's quite a few funds that I think are very dedicated to investing in Vietnam, including my fund, which is AIM Capital. I think there's probably 10 that are very visible who are going to be here for the long term. There's probably 20 or maybe 25 that I think are also dedicated but a little bit less visible. And I think that those companies, some have been having trouble raising capital because I think globally there is some skepticism about Vietnam now, but these guys are here to stay and are, I think, committed. There's also regional guys who, maybe got scared away. There has been some poor performance here. The interest rates are high. Some companies are struggling, and that means that I think the guys that don't have to invest in Vietnam are kind of poking around. So you can see them around town right now, but they're not really making too many investments. There's a few different reasons for that. Sometimes it's just hard to make an investment in Vietnam. They see other opportunities that are good other places. I think for the listed stuff, it's more, prices are so low, people don't want to sell. And there's also just not a lot of liquidity in the market, so people are waiting.
What about from local investors? Is this having an impact on the perception, at least by local investors, of confidence in the market?
I think the local investors probably have less confidence in the market than the foreign investors do in some ways. I think much of the local market is driven by the credit at the banks, and I think as everybody in Vietnam knows right now, interest rates are very high, 18 to 20% plus sometimes, and also there's really, especially in the last couple of months, a real liquidity crunch. So people are having trouble getting loans. So a lot of the stuff that was happening before, there was a lot of buying on margin, basically loans from the banks to buy stocks. Same thing in real estate. I think, in fact, many companies took out loans and the owners actually ended up putting the money into the stock market, things like that. So now the companies are struggling, but also all that money's been sucked out of the stock market. And part of it is the stock market's in VND. People are a little bit worried about VND right now.
Right.
There's a 10% devaluation earlier in the year, 30% since 2007. And I think a lot of people want to have their money in dollars, or probably even more so in gold and some things like that.
What's your take on how Vietnam is being perceived outside of the country compared maybe to other emerging stock markets from foreign investors?
Right, so Vietnam was the belle of the ball in 2006, 2007. That's when I came here, actually. I think that may be when a lot of people came here. And one thing I really noticed when I arrived was just how crazy it was. I think that the high for the PE for the Vietnam index, the price to earnings multiple, was about 43. Mm-hmm. And now it's 9. I think if you take out a couple special industries like financial services and stuff, the PE for many industries, you can buy good companies here now for kind of 4, 5, or 6 times. So just compare that to the 43. It's crazy. And I think that really gives an indication of really about what people in the world are thinking about Vietnam right now. So everybody's talking about China, everybody's talking about Indonesia, everybody's talking about Brazil, everybody's talking about Turkey. And I think some people got burned here pretty badly the last few years. And with the interest rates high and inflation still not under control, the trade deficit, not a lot of foreign currency reserves, I think that people are just being cautious, but I don't think they've forgotten about Vietnam. I think that they'll be back. They're just waiting for things to start going in the right direction a little bit. And I think most people would say at this point, the main thing is inflation. So I think there's 2 ways that we could get inflation under control. One is actually the world slows down and commodity prices go down, etc. That's kind of how Vietnam got out of it the last time. Alternatively, the SBB really has put the brakes on in terms of monetary policy, and I think that just the lack of liquidity, the high interest rates, it is really having an effect on businesses and people now. So it's still up near 20%, but hopefully first quarter or the middle of next year it should start to look better.
Do you see investors moving their money around from listed stocks to the private market, or is it pretty much the same all over?
I haven't really seen that. In fact, I would say it's the other way around. I can say personally, we've always been focused on private equity, and the valuations for some of the listed companies are just so attractive right now. And essentially, they're almost like private companies because the liquidity on the exchange is so low, they barely trade. So we've actually expanded our mandate to actually look at some of the listed stuff as opposed to focusing just on the private stuff we did before. I think people go both ways, but I think there's definitely been a trend in the market this year where the number of private equity deals has been very low. And that's probably a third of last year, which is probably a third of the year before that. And there's funds, which I think is what everybody usually thinks of when they say foreign investor. But we've actually seen a really big uptick in the number of strategic deals, meaning companies buying a Vietnamese company in their industry.
Right, there was Vietcom Bank just got invested by a Japanese company, right? So you're seeing
right.
more of this.
So there's both with big banks and stuff like that, or also some of the smaller companies. So people looking for distribution here, or looking for a cheap production facility here, basically looking for growth. We see a lot of from the Japanese. There's not a lot of growth there. Cost of funds is very cheap. They can come here, buy a company that has high growth. So that's really the thing. So for me, as a fund manager, that's actually very interesting because those are the guys that we actually want to sell the companies that we've invested to.
And so clearly the macroeconomic issues are scaring investors, inflation and currency valuation. What else do you think Vietnam can do to make its market attractive for foreign investors? Just wait it out, or are there some real steps that can be done?
That's a really hard question. I think that the government is pretty well aware of what they are. There's things like red tape. For example, to make an investment here, you have to go through 3-4 months of getting things stamped in different jurisdictions all over the world and having pieces of paper flown around, and then finally get it here. It has to be stamped 15 more times. So things like that, just such a pain that I think a lot of people sometimes just decide, Vietnam is not worth it.
Do you see any movement on that?
It is getting a little bit better, I would say. So they did some things like they allow investors to have more than one broker in Vietnam now. That's actually something that's very convenient. It's a little bit easier to open up those custody accounts. But there's still, foreign investment licenses. There's the cap on foreign ownership of listed stocks, which is something we've run into a couple times where we wanted to buy a company, but we weren't able to because they already had enough 2% foreign ownership. Just general things like corruption, corporate governance. The currency is definitely a big thing. The trade deficit is definitely a big thing. The infrastructure is a big thing. Improving human resources is a big thing. So
Right. These are growing pains.
Long-term, things that need to be addressed. The short-term stuff I think is more trying to make it easier, cut the red tape,
Right.
Be willing to release control of things a little bit, and let the market work.
What are you seeing, say, the next 12, 18 months out? Instability still, or what are you foreseeing?
I guess, I would say at least for the next 6 months, I don't see very much changing. I would, for myself, I would probably say for the next 12 months. I think definitely for the long term, we're very positive. So we're here, we have capital. We're doing our best to deploy it now because we think the time is right. Most people are looking someplace else. The prices are really good. The companies really need the money. You actually are seeing some good, assets that are distressed right now because of the banks and because of consumer demand. So, certainly, I would say 18, 24 months out, we're very positive. Once the inflation gets under control, and a few things look a little bit better, I think the stock market's going to go up. I wouldn't be surprised to see, the PEs go from 5 to 15, plus a lot of the companies have 30, 40, 50% growth. So you put those two things together, and for the medium term, I think it looks very good.
Great. That's all our time. Keirn O'Connor, thanks for joining us.
Well, that has been it for our edition of Vietnam in Focus this week. We'll bring you more stories from Vietnam and also plenty of insights about the business life here in the country in our program, Vietnam in Focus.
Thank you for watching. I'm Quốc Khánh.
And I'm Thuy Dung. Goodbye, and we'll see you next time.